Hi, welcome to lecture on EnvAdapt66 animals. This week we will focus on the water. So how to have enough water in our body, how to regulate the ion concentration, and how to have the right osmotic pressure in our body, and how to get rid of the waste products, etc. And let's first look on this crab in the ocean. These crabs have the exoskeleton and they must change it several times in a year. And how you can get rid of the old exoskeleton is by having larger tissues. And you have larger tissues can be even 2 times larger, and that will explode the old exoskeleton. And how you can have larger tissue is by having hypertrophy in the cells. You have larger cells, and that can be done easily with the water accumulation. So you must have, for example, some solutes more in the cell, and that will cause that, okay, now the water is flowing inside the cell, and that will get the cells larger, and that will get the tissue larger, and that will break down the exoskeleton. Okay, what about then the water balance? Is it important? Yes, it is, because in human body about 60% of our body is water, so it's the most common molecule in our body, and we turn maybe 7% of it every day, so about 3 liters. And important thing is that, okay, this is only very small portion, this blood plasma. It's maybe 9% of the all water in our body is in the blood, and majority of is in cells. And in the small mammals, they are turning maybe 25% of their water content every day. So the large animals we can survive that for that reason a little bit longer time without drinking. But still, only 2% loss of our body water is causing dehydration, and it's extremely common. So I have read somewhere that, okay, 75% of US citizens are having mild dehydration. So practically never the old persons are drinking enough. And it can be very dangerous. So even 15% of the water loss, so losing 6 liters, that's lethal. Okay, why we need the water? It's important and it's essential, but what is the mechanisms where we need it? We need it for 2 or actually 3 purposes. First of all, it's a solvent. So when we have biomolecules, around each of them we have water molecules. So there is a water shield around every protein in our body. And the water is also modulating the protein structure. So we have in the proteins we have areas which are hydrophobic, areas which are hydrophilic, and these hydrophilic regions are toward the water phase. And the second thing is the electricity. So we have sodium, we have potassium, we have chloride, we have magnesium, we have calcium. And they are all water soluble, and they are operating in the water. And without this, we have no electrical regulation, we have no chemical regulation of the body, because all these hormones are also released with this electrical regulation. Then the third thing is the filling. So what are the cells? Cells are sacs, and these sacs are full of water. So these phospholipids are not doing much anything without the water fill. So with the water fill, we can have these organelles, we can have cells, we can have the cells in having some kind of shape because there's water. And let's look on the macroscopic scales. And so where we have these body fluids. So on the minority of the body fluids are extracellular, and when we have the blood flowing in these capillaries, then this water is passing the epithelium to move the interstitial fluid. And if we have maybe 5 liters of blood, we have 15 liters of interstitial fluid. So it's 3 times more. And this interstitial fluid is around all the cells in our body. And the volume of this extracellular solution is threefold. And then the third place where we have is in the intracellular fluid. So inside the cells. And if we have 15 liters of interstitial fluid, then 3 times more, maybe 45 liters in cells. And in the membrane biology, we quite call that, okay, the extracellular solution is out, and inside the cell is in. And how we can get it on inside the cells is with aquaporins. So when we have a phospholipid membrane, it allows oxygen, it allows nitrogen, it allows carbon dioxide, but not much anything that is soluble for water, and one of them is of course the water, and that's why we have the aquaporin through which this water is passing. And the good point is that when you have this aquaporin, then depending on how many aquaporin molecules you have there on the membrane, you can control how much the water is passing through. And for example, in the kidneys, it affects that, okay, in which part of the kidney the water is passing through. And this blood plasma is only 9% of the water in the body, but these two solutions, so the blood and intracellular fluid, they are pretty much the same. They have the same ions, etc. So that's why this blood is represents osmotic pressure of all the fluids, and also the ion concentration of almost all the extracellular solutions. So the good thing is that, okay, the blood sample is so much simple to take. Okay, how we regulate, and is it necessary to regulate? We already learned that, okay, if we lose 15% of our water, we will die, and that's why it's necessary. And that's why we are osmoregulators. So when we are swimming in the ocean, in our environment, there can be 1000 milliosm It's very high osmotic pressure. And when we are swimming in the fresh water, it can be quite much in the zero, the osmotic pressure of the water. So if we would not have this regulation, then we would either there would be water accumulation or losing the water, and that's not happening when we are swimming. But then we have also animals that are not using this regulation at all. They are osmotic conformers. So in high pressure, they also have high osmotic pressure in the blood or whatever fluid they have. And in the low pressure, they have low. So they can be completely the same osmotic pressure in the blood as in the environment, and that saves energy. So you don't have to pump ions across the membranes. And let's look at a few examples. The mussel here in the red line is an osmotic conformer. So in all conditions, the osmotic pressure is the same. But in the stream, it's osmotic regulator. But as you can see, it's not completely. So it's a little bit increasing. It's higher there in the right hand side than in the left hand side. So it regulates the bloody fluid poorly or non-completely. And in some cases, we can have a mixture of conformer and the regulation, like in this green crab. So in the high pressures, the osmotic pressure is the same, but in the low pressures, it's way higher than in the environment. And the interesting thing is that we have to remember that when we are changing the osmotic pressure, that of course can affect that, okay, we have water accumulation or losing the accumulation, and that causes differences on the cell volume, and that's why the animals are quite often volume regulators. Okay, well, how this osmolality in the natural environment is changing. So let's look on the ocean and the freshwater, where you can see that all these ions are way much larger concentrations in the ocean than in the freshwater. And the in the human contains, we have maybe osmotic pressure of 300, and it's necessary to have it because otherwise the neurons are not working. But in the marine environments, they have several-fold higher ion concentrations and high osmotic pressure. So there might be that in the environment, the osmotic pressure is 1000 milliosm. So more than 3 times larger than in human body. And in the freshwater, it would be very small. So maybe 10 milliosm per so it's 30 times lower than in the human body. And in the freshwater or in the ocean, that you can have 2 ways. So you must have ion concentrations or any other substance concentration very high. Or then the other way is that you are not in the isoosmotic with the environment. And actually, a lot of energy is used to when you are maintaining the body fluids different from the environment. And that therefore these kidneys and the regulation is actually very essential for all the organisms. Okay, Over here we have a crab, and it has a high osmotic pressure in hypoosmotic environments. So in high osmotic pressure, it's having the same osmotic pressure as in the environment. But in the low osmotic pressures, it has much higher, so it remains the blood osmotic pressure very high. To compare, over here we would have the human. And the idea why you can have why they want to have this high osmotic pressure is that, okay, then they can invade these brackish waters. So they're in the ocean, there might be 30 grams per kilogram of salt, and then over there only 5. So it's 1/6 of the salt content, and therefore they would have no ions inside the cells at all if they would have the same osmotic pressure as in the environment when they are traveling on these brackish waters. And the same thing happens also in the Baltic Sea. So over here we have 30 grams per 30 grams per deciliter. So it's very high concentration of salt. But then on the Finnish coast, it's maybe 1 or 2. So it's very low. And that causes differences in the animal diversity also. So there on the ocean side, there might be 1,000 different species. And then on the Finnish coast, much less, because the saltiness is not so large. And then if these animals are moving from the marine environment to freshwater, you can see that only small amount of these animals are able to invade in these low salinity environments. And the water is also essential for terrestrial animals. Over here we have different deserts, and deserts means that in the dry areas. So usually the environment is so dry, so when we are breathing and just laying, we are losing water. And then these deserts are places where the rainfall is less than 25 centimeters per year. They can be hot, but they can be also cold. It doesn't matter. So the humidity is limiting element for life. So we know that, okay, in the deserts there are not many animals living. Okay, what happens in the humidity and the temperature? So when we have water as a gas, which works like completely with the same way as in the all other gases, so independently from everything else. And for that reason, we have partial pressure. Quite often called water vapor pressure, and that can be described, for example, the saturation point, where this water cannot be held in the gaseous state. And you can see that when we have a higher temperature, the how much oxygen we can have there in the air is increasing exponentially. So in the hot and humid environment, If the temperature is above our body temperature, then it's very humid, then it's no use to sweat, because the cooling effect comes when we are sweat is going in the air. But also what we can see, that when we have gaseous water is rising in the atmosphere, the higher it goes, the cooler environment there exists. So that form, in the very cold conditions, they will form clouds and rain. But of course, these have also important things in our everyday life. So when we are having the respiration, we are trying to get rid of the carbon dioxide, but we are also losing water, because in the breathing air we have 50 milligrams of water in a liter. If an animal lives in 10 degrees of Celsius, in the breathing air there's only 10 milligrams of water per liter. So that's why these endotherms, like we are also wasting water. And this evaporation depends on the water vapor pressure difference. So how much we lose, it's also affecting that, okay, what is the water particle pressure in the environment. So in the dry environment, we lose more than in the wet. Thank you.